True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. You must understand this. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, the very marrow in my bones chilled. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. You cannot imagine the caution I used, the foresight, the dissimulation. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. His wealth meant nothing to me. It was the eye, only the eye, this blue, filmed, dead eye that watched me without seeing. It judged me. It saw through me. It was the gaze of an unthinking thing that knew all my secrets. I had to be free of it, but the plan had to be perfect. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. Before we continue this descent into madness, if you love classic Gothic thrillers and psychological analyses like this, hit that subscribe button right now for the storyteller Stes Ledger. After I put the lantern in, I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it, just so much, that a single thin ray of light fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me. It was not his person that I hated. It was his evil eye. And as long as the eye was closed, as long as it could not judge me, I could not bring myself to take his life. This process was a torment. For 7 nights, I stood in that doorway, breathing the cold air of his room, watching the sleeping form, waiting for the eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into his chamber, as if nothing had happened. I spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man, indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. I was careful. I was patient. But upon the 8th night, I was more wary than usual. The 8th night, destiny shifted. I was opening the door, and my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening. The old man sprang up in bed. He was not screaming. He let out a low groan. He cried out in the darkness, "Who sets there?" I kept quite still. I said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a single muscle. In the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening. I knew he was listening, just as I had listened, night after night, to the death watches in the wall. He was trying to comfort himself, but he could not. He knew I was there. He knew the darkness was wrong. He had felt me enter the room. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan, not of pain or of grief. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since that first slight noise when my thumb slipped. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. It was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. Louder! I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye, his eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer. When I described the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body, the night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. I was careful. I was not a madman. A madman would have left bloodstains. A madman would have been clumsy. I was meticulous. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I was working directly beneath the bedroom. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out. There was no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught it all. Ha! When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves, with perfect suavity, as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and the officers had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and grew more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles, in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God! No, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew, they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder, louder, louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed, tear up the planks. Here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. Beginning of analysis and personal commentary section of the script. And so ends the confession. This is the entire story, a confession of a meticulous murder, a perfect concealment, and a total psychological collapse. But what did we just read? Were we listening to a madman or something far worse? The narrator insists he is not mad. He insists that his disease only sharpened his senses. And this right here, is the absolute genius of Edgar Allan Poe. He presents us with a narrator who is methodical, calculating, patient, and precise. This man is not a raving lunatic. He plans the perfect crime, and yet his motive is pure insanity. He murders a man he loves because he does not like the way his eye looks. This story is the ultimate exploration of the imp of the perverse, that dark impulse that makes us do things because we know they are wrong. The narrator, by his own confession, is not driven by greed. He is not driven by passion or revenge. He is driven by a form of psychological, obsessive contempt. He sees the old man's eye, this filmed over, pale blue eye, and he cannot stand it. Why? Because the eye is all-seeing. It is a symbol of judgment. It is the gaze of a non-thinking thing that sees the darkness inside the narrator's own soul. He had to destroy the eye, to stop being judged. But the true genius is the heart. This story is, at its core, a perfect, inescapable trap. The narrator is destroyed, not by the police, but by his own sanity. His senses, which he claims are sharpened, become the tools of his own destruction. Did the police officers really hear nothing? Of course not. Did the heart of a dead man who had been dismembered and buried, actually beat? No. What the narrator heard was not the heart of the old man. He heard his own. He heard his own conscience, his own terror, his own guilt, so powerful, so amplified by his sharpened senses, that it took on the physical sound of the thing he had just destroyed. The sound that drives him mad is the sound of his own humanity, buried alive, screaming to get out. Poe masterfully builds this tension. The police officers are polite. They are calm. They suspect nothing. This very calmness is what destroys the narrator. Their polite smiles, their casual chat, in his guilty, paranoid state. He interprets their kindness as mockery. He believes they know. He believes they are playing a game with him, enjoying his agony. This forces his confession. He cannot stand the psychological pressure of not being caught. He needs the release. He needs the judgment he was trying to escape from in the first place. This story is not a whodunit. We know who did it from the first sentence. This is a why did he do it, and more importantly, a how was he caught? And the answer is, he caught himself. Poe is telling us that you can build the perfect wall. You can hide the evidence so cunningly that no human eye can see it, but you cannot hide it from yourself. You cannot escape the beating of your own hideous heart.